right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Dedicated Show. We are live on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and Twitch, and YouTube, actually. And really excited to have you all join us here today for a really fun session. We're going to talk about mapping supply chains with a no-code knowledge graph. And we have a special guest with us today, Marta. She is the Chief Growth Officer at KgBase, and she's going to talk to us about no-code knowledge graphs. Now, really looking forward to this session because we're really going to learn about what is a knowledge graph. We're going to have some cool demos. And for those who have signed up for the session, you're also going to receive some really great educational links. So if you have not already signed up for the event, you can still do that. In the description on LinkedIn and YouTube, you can click a link that says add to calendar and sort of fill out some quick information. Now, as you're joining us, let us know if you are familiar with what is a knowledge graph, because I think that's going to sort of help guide the conversation a little bit if we have, a bunch of knowledge graph experts in the audience versus if we have folks in here who are really hoping to learn about what is a knowledge graph. It'll help us take the conversation in a different direction. Now, also let us know where you're tuning in from. That's always interesting to know. So I'm going to go ahead and bring our guest speaker here, Marta. Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here today with you, Kate.
Yes, it's really awesome to have you here. And I'll mention this again. Your background is stunning. I can't believe that those are real buildings. I haven't been to the city in so long, so I miss all of this.
Yeah, no. I mean, there are some good elements of being in the city these days, and the views are, one of few of them. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a bunch of people joining us here already. We have Herb, we have John from Canada, another John from Tennessee. We got folks from India. Susan Walsh is in the audience. And as people are joining, they're going to let us know if they're familiar with knowledge graphs. And Susan already said she has no idea. So I think this live show is going to be really good for you, Susan. Before we get into this, I think it'll be great to start with introductions. So Marta, if you don't mind to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So like you said earlier, I'm a Chief Growth Officer at Thinknum Alternative Data and KgBase. So Thinknum Alternative Data is an alternative web data platform founded over 6 years ago in New York City. We specialize in publicly available web data sources, aggregation, and turning those data sources into powerful data sets used by investment firms and corporations. So over the last 6 years, we originally started working in hedge fund and investment firm. And then we expanded our audiences to more of business intelligence approaches. During the last year and a half, we've seen a lot of new use cases popping out for alternative data. One of them really important is HR analytics. Gaining deeper understanding of the HR market these days is of great importance to many different audiences and use cases. So that's something top of mind. But today, I really am here to talk about KgBase specifically. So KgBase is a new product of Thinknum. So how we came up working on KgBase is over 2.5 years ago. We've been looking at how, in the most interesting and efficient way, we can create linkages between data sets for Thinknum and for our existing user base of the Fortune 500 companies, internet companies, and investment firms. And that's really how KgBase was born. It was born from really building that need out across the user base, but also for us internally to get better insights and better understanding of our own data sets and how to build moving forward. So that's kind of, the origins. As of today, what is KgBase? So KgBase is a no-code knowledge graph tool, and it has a collaborative UI. It has knowledge graph visualizations, data aggregation functions, mapping, and different analytics form of functionality. Who is using KgBase? Okay, so like I said, it was born from the need from our existing clients, but we also see a lot of adoption across individuals and small communities. They use it as all-in-one solution, meaning they use the UI and our own data import tools. But on the enterprise level, KgBase is used often as kind of a front-end knowledge graph integration, and we provide a wide graph database support to work with those folks in the data space that are already integrating on knowledge graphs and need kind of larger mass adoptions across their organizations.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction and background on the companies and the product. What does KgBase stand for? The name.
So it's a knowledge graph base, basically, but it is a funny name. So we're all kind of joking about it a lot, but KG technically stands, for a knowledge graph these days,
So it's not like the KGB or anything.
I know. Yes, it is a funny joke. And it did, come to mind, we kind of always tend to choose weird names. I think it's kind of a DNA of our team.
Well, I think it's a cool name. It's like, knowledge base, database, knowledge graph base, KgBase makes sense to me. And it looks like most of our audience has no idea about what is a knowledge graph, right? So I think it's a good place for us to start and maybe get into defining what is a knowledge graph.
Sure. Yeah. So, okay, in a nutshell, a knowledge graph is basically a semantic network of entities illustrating relationships between them. So in another simple way of describing that, imagine you have, large data sets that live across big organizations, and those data sets our data sources don't really interact with one another, yet there's a lot of interesting dots that could be connected. Mm-hmm. For instance, between data sets that is using, for instance, supply chain of a company and the data set that's used by, let's say, marketing team. Just for the sake of an example, there's a lot of efficiencies and insights that can be derived by connecting the dots between different data sets. And that's really what knowledge graphs are for. Mm-hmm. So speaking of what they're for, I think the best way to illustrate kind of the idea is to tell you guys about a bunch of common applications.
Yeah, that'll be helpful.
So one of them, originally, keygs are used for semantic search. So the way how Siri works, for instance, the way how Google search works, in many ways, really has to do with knowledge graphs. So they have been around for quite a long time. Other applications, are fraud detection, for instance. And like I said earlier, large organizations dealing with big data use knowledge graphs to break through the data silos. So for example, NASA would use knowledge graphs to find patterns across the research project. So they collect a lot of data, but they're not always cross-referencing the data, or they haven't been in the past. Now they do that using knowledge graphs. Another applications is, for instance, risk management and thematic investing. And that's going to be a part of a use case on a project that I've been working on recently. And I'm really excited to share with you guys all today and show you a little bit more about how those knowledge graphs can be helpful in action.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's very helpful to hear about some of the common applications. We had a question here from George, and he's asking what industries should adopt knowledge graphs?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. One of the industries that is definitely top of mind is finance. So we see that's also where, our expertise come from. So we saw that need and we kind of went after that need by developing this product, is mapping private companies, public companies. So right now, obviously, everybody knows of tickers, that really work on large scale for public companies. For small private companies, those identification formats are not fully developed yet. And there's a lot of opportunities to map companies with knowledge graphs, smaller companies and how they evolve, get acquired, move up a cycle of evolution. So that's one application, and where we really see, those knowledge graphs playing a role. Other one is definitely education. Knowledge graphs are a great way to learn about different things, so can really be applied across all educational fields and patterns, helping students and learners to really connect information and get to the deeper level of critical thinking. I think this is definitely at top of my application, kind of on the mainstream level.
Okay, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I know earlier we mentioned when we were talking about KgBase, you mentioned that this is a no-code knowledge graph. So I think it would be helpful to define sort of the differences between the no-code knowledge graph that you guys have versus, I guess, the regular knowledge graphs out there.
Sure. Yeah, happy to give that introduction too. So in general, like knowledge graphs have been around for quite a long time. So this is not like a new concept. It's something that in technology and semantic networks, scientists and data specialists have been talking about for like over 20 years or 30 years now. But the no-code knowledge graphs are very new because they really bring the applications of semantic networks to like mainstream use with collaboration, data visualization, and like a UI that anybody can really use. And that's a big difference, right? Because in the past, a lot of KGs or knowledge graphs are not even visualized. So there's no way to really understand them for all of us because they're used only by a small group of data scientists that will work on a specific use case or problem. So that's really how no-code knowledge graphs are making a difference by just giving access to just a larger group of people.
Okay. Yeah, I think this next question is going to be really helpful for us to understand how you're expanding this to a large group of people. Ambar is asking, is all the data feeding into your knowledge graph open source? I guess in the same concept.
Yes. So I would say there's plenty of open data sets on our platform, KgBase, that can be used by anybody that wants to understand how to work with a knowledge graph. So absolutely. There are some data sets that are private to our users. So this comes on like enterprise level situation where they have the data they're feeding into their own models and they want to work with our front-end integration. So that's where this is really kind of private and has to do with their own infrastructure. But yeah, in a general principle, yes.
Yeah, and I think this fits in perfectly with what I wanted to talk about next, which is actually one of the data sets that you have on your site, the Open Collab supply chain data set that we were going to talk about today. So I think it would be helpful if you can provide some background on that data set. And I know you'll share your screen eventually. So guys, make sure you stay tuned and see some amazing stuff here from Marta.
Yeah. So first of all, so the supply chain knowledge graph for climate action, we call it, as an open data set with a mission to improve country and company level collaboration on renewable energy adoption and local manufacturing sustainability reporting. So, okay, so like a lot to really digest, but I'm going to try to walk you guys through it like step by step and see how we got to that, conclusion, because that's really kind of a conclusion that comes from analyzing the supply chain data and also analyzing the market. As you know, we're spending a lot of time in finance. We see the ESG space exploding. There's a lot of missing links in terms of understanding what companies are doing, what impacts they have, but also on the nation level, how countries and companies are collaborating. And there's a lot there that is not fully described, and therefore the knowledge graph. So for you guys, in the meantime, I think it would be really helpful to maybe look at the article that I wrote about that topic. Maybe Kate can share a link, and I'm going to carry on and tell you a little bit more about that. So Nike, right? We all know Nike, a large, sportswear company, and we probably have their stuff at home. So they aim to use 100% of renewable energy by 2025. But they all put like environmental pledges out there, but they only apply to their own offices and stores and factories, which makes sense. However, 80% of the brand's carbon footprint comes from sourcing, right? So sourcing of their materials and manufacturing. So with this supply chain knowledge graph, stakeholders can now contribute information about supply chains of leading companies that are not covered by their environmental pledges, but play a significant role in their carbon footprint. So this data is really kind of a missing link in analyzing the environmental risks and as related to companies and countries participating in the manufacturing supply chain processes. So how we got here? Okay, so Nike and Adidas have released their annual factory list in a machine readable format, like really for the first time in 2021, which is basically an Excel sheet. Yeah, we got an Excel sheet. So everybody's really excited. We can now, we don't have to play with the PDFs and other formats that existed before as a reporting format for this type of data. And we can do some easy work with tools like KgBase to run some analysis on the supply chain data, and also work on enriching those data sets with, for instance, like emission data and gender data. So what really plays in a big role here is figuring out how to take a publicly available source and then enrich it with other data that makes it very meaningful and viable for analysis, also for like typical users like investors or stakeholders in like the climate action ecosystem.
Okay, so I think that's helpful for us to get an understanding of the data set. And I did share the link across all the social media platforms. So guys, make sure you at least open this in a new tab and check this out after the live session is over. And we will send emails out as well that will include all of these links. I think at this point, I also want to learn a bit more about what you guys refer to as the UBIDs, or the Universal Business IDs, and sort of talk to us about how this helps with mapping the smaller companies and enables standardization across those smaller companies, and also how it relates to this supply chain data set project that you had going on.
For sure. Yeah, I would love to flesh that out. So earlier there was a question, right? So that came in from the audience about like, what are the typical applications? And I mentioned finance and mapping systems. So this is really relevant to that part of, the discussions that we were having. So UBIDs are called basically Universal Business IDs. So we created them as a function for KgBase, which allows us to map small companies and enable standardization across small companies, so the information about them can be easily found and mapped to other data sets where they're being mentioned or used. And that's very important for risk management. So another use case of knowledge graphs I mentioned earlier, being able to identify and link data map to small private companies is a top of mind issue for risk management. Therefore, KG plays a big role in that. So long story short, how do I get here? So I was analyzing supply chains of like Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour. So another company in the field. Under Armour actually doesn't release Excel sheets yet, so that's too bad. But I still went ahead and like worked on that, and that was a lot of work. And I found that the three companies, regardless of like different policies and like levels of engagement into like sustainability efforts, they actually share like a lot of same external vendors, which I found like very interesting. And that's really where, the issue of, supply chain data and this whole ESG sustainability work really comes to a head, where you realize that those small private companies that play a big role in the carbon footprint of those large corporations are really overlooked in the mapping processes. And that's where the Universal Business IDs play a great role in mapping that data to the source and mapping all the information. So what I was able to do also is enrich the data from the reports of Nike and Adidas with Under Armour, and in that sense, create kind of a unified sustainability report across all brands, feeding in the reporting from other brands and getting kind of a more standardized picture into their supply chain data.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much for that description. And I know we have a link. I shared that link for the UBIDs as well, if folks want to dig in a little bit more and learn about how KgBase leverages the UBID. We did have some questions that came in. I'll start with Tashvin's question. He's asking, is KgBase applicable in the financial sector? Which I know you did mention finance as one of the areas where this can apply, but he's talking about maybe conducting network analytics.
Yeah, it's definitely 100% applicable. And we actually done a bunch of different projects to illustrate that in the past. One of them was mapping Crunchbase and startup ecosystem. And that's kind of a form of network analytics across like small private companies and acquisitions, and creating unique IDs for those, so they're easier verifiable and it's just easier to research and get to better information. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And before we get into the demo, let's take one more question here from Ambar. He's asking, what kind of workflow automation can KgBase provide on top of the knowledge graph? Because he works with extensively in the space and the investments, the country strategy, using knowledge graphs, and he's interested in knowing how can a strategy professional use this tool?
Sure. Yeah. In terms of like workflow automation has a lot to do with how we integrate with like data inputs and also with graph databases. So by creating those integrations with different file formats, but also with different graph databases, that can really enhance and limit the time spent on such projects. And another element here is our data visualizations are really easy and fast to generate. And that I think is a great tool for a strategy professional to illustrate a point when it comes to working with like large data sets and presenting it on a larger scale. So I'd love to tell you more about that after the session in detail, and maybe the demo will also clear up some of these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I can't wait to get to the demo. So whenever you're ready, Marta, we can share your screen and talk through how you use the no-code knowledge graphs to get some insights.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm ready to go.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so I hope you guys can see my screen right now. So I confirm. So as of right now, you should be looking at a kind of a larger scale knowledge graph of the supply chain of Adidas and Nike, and as mapped to countries specifically and their supply chain. So that's kind of a visualization view into the data. So how does the data live on KgBase? I'm going to start looking at that. So there are different tables that describe different parts of the data in the knowledge graph. So the most important one here is obviously the supply chain data, like I mentioned. So there are relationships that are being created between different entities. So in our case scenario is Nike, a brand, a country, factory name. We're also mapping different information like the owner's name, the owner's gender, which is a form of enrichment data. We track parent organizations, so like I mentioned earlier, in finance, that mapping process is extremely important. Different information here that are being mapped are the number of workers, also their gender, provinces, cities, etc. And we're ending this table with the UBID code. So each of the factories producing for Nike or Adidas have their unique UBID code that will be feeding into the large UBID database. So as this data set grows, basically the data will be automatically enriched as there's more inputs and about those factories and more information, which we see coming actually by the end of this year in 2023. The emission data will become a compulsory part of the releases, and that's really where this data set will play a huge role. Schema here is a way the graph is being built. So what you're looking at here are basically relationships that are being built between different part of the data. So like the brand, the country, and then the supply chain data as mapped to factories. So obviously there are many other relationships and questions that can be answered with this data set specifically. And those that sign up for KgBase can use that data set, create their own copy and query the data set as well as enrich it in real time together with other collaborators. So what we did create is kind of a change set capabilities, which allows us to accept and decline inputs. So kind of similar to what Wikipedia would do in kind of a text format, we are doing that in a graph format. So to give you kind of a deeper insights into this specific graph, I prepared this kind of a focus query here. It's focusing on Adidas, and all of those are representing, all of those are representing, I'm going to go through here. a little problem. What we're looking at right now is basically a graph of all the supply chain vendors of Adidas. And what I can do is by adding to focus, I can connect those supply chain vendors to specific countries. And at the end of my exercise here, what I'll end up with is basically a view into all the countries that play a significant role in supply chain of Adidas, and is specific to Global South, but also looking at United States, Europe, etc. So that's how the graph works. I'm having a little issue, but I'm going to try to show you guys here how you can also create complex queries. So at the moment right now, you're looking at our complex query UI system. So here I can pick specific nodes and then query for other connections. So those are all relationships I was showing you earlier. So how it connects to factory, parent organization, country. So example here is this one factory of Nike, and their parent organization is mapped here as well, the country. So that's in a nutshell on KgBase for that one particular project, the way you want to access the project. So that's an important part. I'm going to show you over here. Let me show you. Oh, I see the reason why we're running into this issue.
Oh yeah, that will happen if you're not logged in, right?
Yeah, so there's a login issue. So I'm the collaborator in this project. This is publicly available project right now. So I'm going to share this link with you guys, and I think it will be important that for those that want to really check it out and also connect later and learn a little more about that sustainability reporting, but also other knowledge graph applications, this will be kind of a great exercise to go through and check it out in action. So all of you can use that link, which I'm going to share in a second, to request access to this data set, which is open to public, and also try out KgBase. I'm gonna go and share this in a comment section as well.
Yeah, I think that'd be really helpful so people can go in and get access and check out the data as well. We do have several questions that came in, and I actually have some of my own questions here as well. I'll start with the UBID codes because I did notice it on in your data there. How do you actually generate this UBID?
Right. So how can I generate it? So we created this database of UBIDs. So when there's a new project being created on the platform, it feeds that large database of UBIDs and finds connection. So basically, if there is already a company with that name and that code in the database, we're able to match it and to avoid the duplicates, which is kind of the main issue across mapping processes, and then enrich the data with what's already in the system and provide an opportunity for the collaborator to verify some of the data. And that goes back to change sets where that collaboration process has to be approved and reviewed and curated internally to maintain the quality of the data set.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you. And Fernando's here saying that's a very cool tool. Cool. I agree, Fernando. We had a question here. Let's take the first one from George. He's asking, what supply chain management systems do you integrate with to draw in the data?
So that's kind of case by case on the enterprise level. So we actually are starting this effort right now. So the way it works is like we integrate with all machine queryable formats. So that also includes, for instance, like JSON files and Excel sheets, CVS, and then any supply chain management tool has an export function. As of right now, that's kind of a basic way.
Okay.
Way to go in the future is definitely integrate with supply chain data or ERP systems that can feed in the data directly. And that's really where this could play a role. But it's still kind of early stage.
Okay, got it. And then so the data gets fed in. Where does it actually sit? And then is there sort of a limit to how much data can sit within this knowledge graph or database?
Sure. So we can support, like up to millions of nodes in our, data sets, but it really it's up to graph databases on enterprise level, right? So that's really where, the question sometimes comes down to, the other vendors where, they just, there's enough graph databases out there right now to support very large data sets in a graph format. And that is really comes down case by case to where, a specific client or a specific user needs a specific capacity. And then we provide those integration. They're already part of the offer and the program, and they can just choose the one that works best for them.
Okay, thank you. We had a question here from Herb. He's asking, is there an example where the data set includes a measure?
Data set includes a measure.
Because I guess the data set that you were showing now had mainly dimensions, right? We had the owner's name, we had country name, and I guess measures would be something like total number of sales or units sold or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. There are many other data sets that that have like specifically numerical values, or that's 100% a part of it. To give you an example of it, something that we do track a lot with Thinknum that applies here is, for instance, pricing data sets. We look a lot at like web traffic data sets. It's all kind of measurable numerical data. And yes, absolutely.
Okay, got it. Thank you. So all of this looks pretty simple, right, when you're doing it. So I do want to talk about maybe some of the challenges that data analysts and data scientists tend to have when they're working with knowledge graphs, or if you want to talk about the supply chain example in further detail in terms of what challenges can be faced.
Right. So like just working in general, with knowledge graphs, or just trying to do any meaningful work with data. I think, those folks that are working with data on a daily basis, still see like data cleaning, aggregation, mapping as definitely a big challenge. And, we constantly work on improving those tools and solutions on our end, and also our final data set delivery. So I think that's a number one thing where just across board on the industry level is still something that has to be worked on. On the other hand, I believe there's still a large gap between like professional applications and mainstream use, and that's kind of the gap we're trying to close with KgBase and make the tool constantly easier and to use. I think it's a top of mind challenge. That's why we're kind of doing our best to to take upon that, get a lot of user feedback, and work around those issues and figure out how to make it even easier to use. I think it's going to be a top of mind thing moving
forward. I think with where we are now with technology, as long as we can make it easy to use, I think it's going to be a lot more successful in terms of user adoption. And in terms of users, we did have a question here earlier in terms of the roles in a company outside of the data scientist and the data analyst. Who else do you think should actually use KgBase?
Sure. So I think it really depends on the company, right? So I think anybody that runs research departments and manages other analysts should use a tool like KgBase to cross-reference research across departments and across verticals. I think that's a top-of-mind application. I believe that educators should use, so those that really focus on onboarding, educating teams are also very important. I believe it even has like an HR analytics applications where when the new team members are joining, specifically in this remote virtual environment, they can kind of join the organization and understand who is who, and also what common interests they have, and what they have in common, what they share in common. I think that that's like an application that's not fully mainstream yet, but it's definitely top of mind. So I think
Mhm.
HR, I would say, I think like heads of research, uh, definitely outside of the kind of typical analysts and data scientist applications, but also I think marketing teams for sure can really take advantage of KgBase as well.
Yeah, and I think you did mention educators before as well, right? That's another potential role.
Yeah.
Okay, we had a question around the supply chain data sets. Are they created artificially? I know you mentioned you're using an Excel spreadsheet. I guess that's real data, right? So we're not
Yeah.
using artificial data here.
No, absolutely not. So we are basically collecting releases of annual factory lists from top companies that are involved in global self supply chains, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where the data is coming from. So there's no artificially created data. There's also a set of researchers that work on data enrichment and creating new columns and new kind of inserts that are giving us kind of a deeper understanding of those small private companies.
Okay, got it. We had a question from Stephen here. He's asking how big is the talent pool for KgBase in the US or worldwide?
Uh, so would that be in a sense of like our team, or would that
I think it's more around like how many people are actually using KgBase or
oh,
knowledgeable in KgBase.
gotcha. As of right now, we have over 1,000 users, and that's kind of the range, and they really come from all around the world. So there's a large user base in the United States because that's kind of our core audience already for ThinkNum. But we do see users in Europe, we do see users in Asia, and that's definitely evolving as we are trying to extend our reach. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that. Now, I know you mentioned the Unified Sustainability Report, and there might be folks in the audience now who are just super excited and really motivated, want to try this out. So, how can they contribute? How can they collaborate on this report?
So there's a link that you shared earlier, and that's a link to the Open Supply Chain Knowledge Graph for Climate Action that they can access. That's
Mm-hmm.
one way. Another way is, reaching out to me directly if they need another form of support of working with the tool. I'll love, feel free to reach out to me after the session on and do that. You can also simply sign up through kgbase.com and try our individual subscription, and there you can access different open templates and different data sets outside of just supply chains.
Okay, perfect. Yes, guys, if you want to get involved, make sure you contact Marta. One other question I had for you is, you've been in the space for some time now. What do you see as sort of the future of knowledge graphs? I know we're moving into more user-friendly, no code, but in the next, let's say, 3 to 5 years, are you expecting any other changes or innovations in this space?
I think the linkages between like no code tools and graph databases will become more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, something that's definitely going to happen, and that will enable mass adoption. So the front end knowledge graph tools will become a new gateway for mainstream adoption of graph databases.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's all look forward to that. That's great news. I think at this point we're gonna wrap up, and I always like to leave with a question around where can people actually go. So I know we're gonna share all these great links, and you mentioned that folks can message you directly. So do you prefer LinkedIn, Twitter, or is there another way that they can find you?
LinkedIn is best. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I'd love to connect here.
Awesome. Well, Marta, I want to thank you so much for your time here today. I personally learned a lot. I love these sessions because I get to ask all the questions that I'm curious about, and we, engage with the audience as much as we can, and really learning about all the coolest, newest tools out there. So this is really helpful, And I want to thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thank you guys for tuning in today. And Kate, thank you for having me. It was a great pleasure to tell you guys all a bit more about KgBase.
Awesome. All right, and I'll send everybody the links as well as with the recording. I know we have some folks just joining us here, like Ravid. Ravid, we'll email you the recording. You're a bit late here. We're towards the end of the session, but great to see you. And thank you for everyone in the audience who joined us. Great to see you, and Happy New Year, since this is our first session of the year. And we'll see you online.
Okay, thank you guys.